Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Art Like Everything Else, the podcast. I'm your host, Simone, and this week we're going to be talking about art and lovelessness, or at least the perception of lovelessness. Now, lovelessness, this might be a tongue twister for myself. Now, lovelessness is defined as having no love, and in today's episode, we'll be discussing two works of art that I feel, at least personally, do a really good job of kind of displaying this very sentiment. Like this idea of being without love and like the perception of what being in love is supposed to kind of be. Before we get started though, and explore those two works of art, I would love it if you could share some of your favorite works of art that might display this sentiment as well in the comments. So it could be music, it could be a show, it could be a movie, a comedy special, you name it, drop it in the comments below and I'll be sure to check it out. With that being said, let's get started. So, for our first work of art, we'll be exploring an episode of the YouTube web series People Watching that's written and created by Winston Roundtree, and it is currently on the Cracked YouTube channel. I'll be sure to place a link to the very specific episode that I'm talking about in the description box below. But I do encourage you to watch the entire series. I do believe, because I think it's an amazing web series. It explores a lot of different topics that kind of like a lot of people kind of go through. So before I do go into the specifics of the episode we're going to be talking about for our show today, I want to tell you a bit more about this series. So People Watching is a web series by Winston Roundtree. The first episode for the first season was released in 2017, and then season 2 came out the following year. So this series follows adults who are dealing with everyday struggles, so like depression, insecurity, kind of feeling like a failure and that you're not actually living up to the potential that past teachers saw in you. And the one that we'll be discussing specifically today, lovelessness. So the episode that I'm going to be talking about today is season 2, episode 9 of the People Watching series, and the title of the episode is Love. So this is going to be kind of spoilers for this episode, so if you want to experience a spoiler-free description, I would recommend you pause this show, go check out the episodes. It's like literally just over 12 minutes long, so it's not a very long watch at all. Pause it, go check it out, come back, and we can continue. But yeah, so moving on, this episode follows the series regulars trying to get an apartment. So this apartment is supposed to be the best of the best apartment. The neighbors are quiet, apparently it's all librarians that live in the apartment. Nobody's loud whatsoever. There's great water pressure. It's an affordable price. It's all inclusive. It is essentially supposed to be like the perfect bachelor's apartment. However, to get this apartment, you do have to convince the person who is currently living there all of the ways in which you are alone and will always be alone. So in this episode, several of our regular characters, or our recurring characters, kind of like the recurring characters in the series, they appear and they do their best to kind of convince the current tenant why they are the most qualified for the apartment. So some are saying that they are too weird to be a match for anybody. There are some others saying that sometimes you just know when your soul is just not meant to find someone because of their mental problems. Then there's another person that's like they're bereft of hope and just incapable of even meeting someone. And they kind of continue on throughout this episode, and it goes deeper and deeper in all the ways that they are alone and they will die alone. And they are completely hopeless in ever finding love. And then when the tenant is like, oh, so you giving up? You can't be normal? And they are agreeing and they're like, yeah. But then when the tenant accuses them of being incapable of love, they all sort of like, whoa, 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 whoa. Who said all that? And then they all kind of start like defending themselves, like, no, actually I am more than capable of love. I care a lot. Actually, I've known love before. I've been lucky enough to be able to look for love currently, and like some like still want love, like even though it is hard, even when it seems almost impossible of a task to achieve it, they still desire love. And then like the tenant even asks, like, how can you be hopeful when all you've ever been met with is pain? And then some of the characters, they actually kind of keep talking, and they talk about how some things are worth it despite the pain, even going so far as to say that you are not incomplete without a relationship, you are incomplete without love. And then there's a barrage of like all of them like kind of leaving and slamming the doors because they're really offended that she would ever even accuse them of not knowing love. Because all the characters are storming out of this perfect apartment, and like leaving it behind because they are very much incapable of love, and they've recognized that. And that's kind of just how that episode ends. And I did feel like this particular episode of People Watching did a very good job of showing lovelessness, or at least the perceived lovelessness that I believe is prevalent heavily today. Now, if you haven't watched it and you still listen to this spoilerish version, I will say still be sure to watch the full episode, because it is still, there's so much more than what I said, and I do believe that episode absolutely deserves a full watch through. But the lovelessness shown in season 2, episode 9 of People Watching, I believe is also present in our next work of art. Our next work of art is by Moses Sumney and his album, and it is going to be his album Aromanticism. So Moses Sumney is a singer, a songwriter, an actor, a director, and he's just an all-around creative who released this project that we're going to be discussing today in 2017 as well. So like that was also the same year that People Watching was released, the first season at least. And so this project contains 11 tracks on the non-vinyl version. I did peep that there's a vinyl version and there's a 12th track, but because that's not accessible unless you actually buy the vinyl, we're only going to be talking about the 11 tracks for this episode. But I'm getting the vinyl and I'm going to check out the 12th track. And maybe I'll just add notes in the comments or something. But yeah, so talking about, there's 11 tracks on this version of the album we're going to be discussing today, and Moses Sumney himself has these are some of the words he had to say about this album. Many of the origin stories about the inception of our species establish this blueprint for coexistence, that everybody has an equal and opposite body, a destined companion, without which we are incomplete. Our modern construct of romance still upholds this paradigm. Romantic love is the paramount prize of existence. But what if I can't access that prize? In response to this construct, Aromanticism is a concept album about lovelessness as a sonic dreamscape. It seeks to interrogate the idea that romance is normative and necessary. And so these are the sentiments that are definitely, I would say, are really prevalent throughout the album. So starting with track 2, because track 1 is a reprise and it doesn't really have any lyrics. It's just some beautiful music. So still listen to it. But track 2 is Don't Bother Calling. It's a conversation where Moses is kind of talking about not meeting the needs of the person he's talking to. Like he's not available for the needs of the other person, and he's just not like able to provide the needs that be the person that this other person kind of needs him to be. The next track, Plastic, which was actually released on a previous EP in 2014. That's when I first heard this particular song. But this song, Plastic, it kind of details the vulnerability and the reality of who Moses is. He talks about understanding the struggles of not feeling like he measures up to the ideas kind of placed upon him regarding like relationships. In fact, like there's some almost like some allusions to, or inspo from the myth of Icarus, in which like his wings are made of plastic. His wings, like he is not as foreboding as people might assume. But yeah, track 4, Quarrel, according to Sumney, he actually says that this song is about power, and it's about the dynamic between two people from different social groups in a relationship. And so it's kind of talking about the ways in which people from varying like social or like just political groups can display a lovelessness, even though they feel like they experience love with like maybe people they are really close to. They display this lovelessness or this lack of love for people in other groups. And like there's just like there was, I think, a line kind of talking about, or at least alluding to, like how can you assume we're on equal footing when like how our like realities and our identities show up in society will put us on unequal footing. How can you say it's possible for us to love each other equally, type stuff, which I thought was a really cool commentary that I think definitely needs some interrogation. Track 5 is a quick story from Moses, and he's telling about a time where he's traveling with his mother, and he says, "I love you" to his mother, and she responds, "Thank you." In track 6, Lonely World, this track is kind of essentially telling us that lonely is all there is and all that is actually guaranteed for us in our life, in our lifetime. Like we are only guaranteed our own loneliness. In track 7, Make Out in My Car, Moses says, "I'm not trying to go to bed with you, I just want to make out in my car." And he says that the entire song. That is pretty straightforward. Yeah, he don't want to go to bed with them, he just wants to make out in his car. In track 8, The Cocoon-Eyed Baby, is another spoken word piece that addresses the love-centric nature of life as discussed on Genius. So in track 9, Doomed, this was actually a single for this project. Moses asks several questions to kind of inquire about if he is truly doomed, if he doesn't abide by that love-centric idea that the world kind of expects him to live by. In track 10, Indulge Me, Moses tells us how all of his past lovers have found others, and he is alone. He is all by himself. And in the final track, Self-Help Tape, we hear the words, "Imagine being free, imagine healing," a beautiful track that explores freedom as healing. And something I actually learned while researching the lyrics for this, because I'd heard this project before, and like the vocalizations in the very beginning was always kind of just described as like harmony, stuff like that. But I actually looked up, and apparently a lot of the vocalizations that's happening at the very beginning, because Apple Music doesn't actually explain this, but it's Twi. It's a language. So Moses Sumney is actually Ghanaian American, and Twi is a language spoken by a lot of Ghanaian people. And the translation, I believe, is roughly like "I need you" in that language, those harmonies that are kind of happening at the beginning of that song. And I thought that was actually really, really cool. But overall, yeah, I do believe this is a really beautiful album, and I would highly recommend it to anyone and everyone. It explores lovelessness, especially as it is often portrayed in the society that we live in today, devoid of love, at least in the romantic sense. So something that I thought was really cool about both of these projects, they kind of both depict lovelessness in a way as like, especially how society would kind of depict romance. So, well, first things first, Aromanticism is a valid orientation. As I'm exploring this topic and this depiction of lovelessness, I am by no means trying to undermine that orientation as valid. I am simply talking about the ways in which that it shows up in these works of art, how the use of aromanticism to kind of describe or at least allude to the idea of no love, despite aromanticism specifically being not having a preference for like romantic love. So yes, that I don't want to offend or disregard anybody's orientation, because it's valid and I believe it's valid, and I'm simply exploring this in the idea of lovelessness, especially perceived lovelessness, as alluded to or explained almost exactly by society. But yes. Going back, so both of these projects kind of explore lovelessness specifically in the way that, like, when talking about all the ways in which they are alone or are going to be alone, it is very interesting that they both talk about all the ways in which, like, they're either like not available. So like in people watching, we hear several characters that are just like, I'm too weird, I can't do this, I'm not able to do that, I'm not, like, that is beyond me. The ability to love in that way is beyond me almost, and that is why they're going to be alone, and that is why they are without love. Whereas Moses Sumney kind of talks about it, like, personally, all the ways in which he does not feel like he's able to show up for a partner in that way, kind of depicting the lovelessness in that regard, that, like, he is not capable of loving someone in that way. And so as a result, that is ultimately why he's just not, like, he is also loveless or experiencing lovelessness. Another really cool thing, I think, is that, like, both of these projects sort of interrogate the way that society defines love and how it is allowed to show up. So with Moses Sumney, he's talking about the ways in which that he's talking about the ways in which love is often, especially defined by society. Because also in that description that I read from of the excerpt from about where he talks about his album, he's kind of talks about how, like, in Greek mythology, even in, like, Christian texts, there are, like, the illusion that, like, you are incomplete without a romantic partner. That you are incomplete without a romantic partner, and that is often how society defines love. If you do not have a relationship, you are forever alone, always going to be alone. You are experiencing lovelessness. You are without love, and that is how society defines it. And in Moses Sumney project, he kind of interrogates that, like, okay, if I am not able to show up in that way for other people, am I without love? Am I godless? Because if God is love and love is defined as this, and I'm not able to do that, am I now godless? Which I thought was a really, really cool way to kind of interrogate that. And then in people watching, they also kind of interrogate this closer towards the end of the episode, actually, where in the beginning, even though, like, they were tasked with, like, talking about how they are always alone, they're going to always be alone, and, like, when it came to it and the tenant was like, so that means you're without love, they were all like, whoa, love is actually so much more than romantic relationships. Love can be a love for your job. Love can be a love for, like, the people around you. Love for just existing. Like, one of the characters is a musician, and she talked about how much she loves, like, being able to show herself or be herself when she performs her music, and that is something she loves. And, like, she doesn't feel as though she is without love simply because she is without a relationship. And I think that's something that's really, really important to kind of interrogate. And I also think something really cool that I think both of these projects also kind of bring up is, like, the need to sort of redefine what it means to love, especially in today's society. So in people watching, in that episode, Love, we are discussing all the ways that love actually does show up, that love is not just relationships, that love is not just being romantically involved. Love is so much more. And then with Moses Sumney project, he talks about all of the ways in which, like, because he's not able to kind of show up for a partner, is that equated to him not being capable of love. And there was actually a really cool note on Genius that I saw that I thought made a really, really good point. So I'm American born and raised. However, Moses Sumney is the child of Ghanaian immigrants. And so in the, I believe that's track 4, in the track Stoicism, it's him depicting that story of him telling his mom, I love you, as his mother is putting him in the car, and she says thank you. And the note on the Genius on kind of talked about how like it's a common, like the ways in which people like not from America kind of express and show love is going to look different. And so like I think it's important that we kind of redefine what it means to love, because like I would hate for love to not show up, or for someone to feel like I don't love them because I don't show up in a very specific way. And that is something I think was actually a really interesting point. And it's like, it's conversations that I kind of peep every now and then all around the internet about how there are people who come from other countries, people who come from immigrant parents who like, they witness the ways in which certain demographics kind of show love, and very often it's vocal, but for a lot of other countries and a lot of other cultures, it's actually like love is almost unspoken, and like love shows up in action. And so I know in a lot of Asian communities, like they talk about like their parents kind of cutting fruit for them, and I think that's really cute and that's really beautiful, honestly. And I see it a lot in the shows and stuff that I watch. In like other communities, it's kind of like showing up for them in ways that like when like their child is needed. I believe it was this immigrant family who went with their daughter to like map out their way to work when their child kind of moved to a whole new city. And it's just like things like that kind of showing up, but not always being defined as love within like other cultures and stuff. I think that's really important to honestly redefine what it means to love, or at least define it for yourself, so that like you're not measuring what love looks like for other people. Like just because you don't see something that I might consider to be a very loving action for me, just because you wouldn't consider that love, or like they're not displaying this love in a way that you believe it should be displayed, doesn't mean it's not love. As long as it's not harmful. Like, as long as it's not harmful, I want to make that caveat. Like, abuse is abuse is abuse. And we want to be very specific. I want to be very specific in my language, in that, like, as long as it's not harmful, then yeah. I believe, like, we should be allowed to define what love is for ourselves. And, like, kind of move away from how society would actually define love. Which actually reminds me of this TikTok I saw, by Ayanda Understood. I saw it years ago. If I can find it, I will absolutely put it in the description. But in that TikTok, they actually talk about how I believe like there's been just like this societal push to focus on romantic love as like the end all be all, when in reality like a more communal love could be honestly what we need. Because like romantic love makes it a you problem. Communal love, it's an us problem. And so like I think that was actually a really cool thing to kind of point out, because honestly both of these works kind of dip into that in a bit, I feel like. So with people watching, they talk about, like, one of the guys is actually talking about the ways in which he wants better for men specifically, and like to know that like, hey, you're good. Like he brings up like suicide statistics and everything, and like he wants better for men as a whole. And then Moses Sumney, while not like outright directly kind of talking about that, but he is kind of inquiring, like, if I don't love somebody romantically, am I broken? And like, is there something wrong with me? And I think it makes sense to interrogate that growing up in a society that focuses so much of your life, and so much, like, there's so much marketing and just like propaganda pretty much out there about the importance of romantic love, that if you do not desire it, you are often seen as like defective. And that's just not the case. Love shows up in a multitude of ways. However, often in society, romantic love is what is often prioritized, and I don't think that's fair. But yeah, I think maybe even the societally prescribed lovelessness too can be an art like everything else. Alrighty, and so last but not least, the art for this week's all moment is actually a meme that I found on Twitter. 1 second, I want to pull it up. Here we go. So for those listening, I'm going to describe the memes. For those watching the video, I'm going to put it on the screen because it is a picture. And so this picture goes, damn, it's thundering. Anyways, so yeah. So if for those listening, it's a very common meme template where there's like some person standing in the corner by themselves, and then there's like two couples on the floor dancing. So this iteration of the meme, I wish I knew who created this. I do not. I found it on Twitter on a random page. I am so sorry. But for this particular meme, in the corner, instead of like a person, there is a pile of dust, and then the two couples that are dancing on the floor. And the pile of dust is saying, they don't know everything becomes dust. They don't know everything becomes dust. And then the first couple you see is like, we do and yet we love. And then the second couple is like, and yet we dance. And I think that was such a beautiful sentiment, especially because, like, I don't know, it's so often like people are very like memento mori type. So memento mori is like, remember you must die, essentially. I used to be a memento mori ass person. It's kind of a depressing mindset to be in, if I'm at least for me it was, if I'm in all honesty. But like, to know that everything becomes dust, like, yes, we know we're all gonna die, yes, we know we're all gonna not exist at some point in time, but in the meantime, we are gonna love, and we are gonna dance, and we are going to live our lives, and we are going to do our best to be here and be in this moment. And I thought that was a really pretty and really beautiful sentiment, because it is very, very easy to get into this memento mori ass mindset, where it's like everything's going to end anyway. Like, why do anything? But it's also like, why not? Why not? But yeah, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.